Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Space Law and Policy podcast series. I'm your professor, Glenn Torres-Spelliscy. Thanks for joining. There are a number of reasons that humans dream about colonizing other celestial bodies in our solar system, and potentially beyond. One is obviously the sense of adventure that is present in any such endeavor. Just as news of the New World compelled many European explorers to set sail for the horizon, so too does the promise of new worlds compel the modern astronaut to envision the establishment of a human presence on the Moon, Mars, and perhaps moons of the larger gas giants, among others. There are, of course, more practical reasons to consider becoming a multi-system species. The Earth has limited resources, and humans have done much to plunder what is readily available. Yes, we can still access more minerals and useful materials and resources deeper down into the Earth's crust, but doing so leaves indelible scars on our planet, destroys habitats, and releases potentially toxic chemicals into our air, water, and soil. If we could reduce the burden on any single celestial body by lowering the amount of people in a given environment, presumably we could make a positive impact. Along the same lines, continued population growth is leaving the Earth more and more crowded. And as medical technology continues to improve, prolonging the average human life, we can only expect to get more crowded. Most experts predict that by the end of the next century, Earth's population will be somewhere between 11 and 14 billion inhabitants. It's a lot of people, and there are legitimate questions as to how the quality of life of Earth's inhabitants will be affected by such a population explosion. Opening up other habitats that would allow humanity to spread out across the cosmos? Well, it's one possible solution. So as we begin to think about setting up human colonies amongst the stars, let's start with that foundational question. Is colonization even allowed? The exploration of new lands and territories, whether on Earth or another celestial body, breeds a desire to control that territory, to control its resources for exploitation, to control its access to protect property rights, and to control its security and a projection of power. These are not new problems, but are they different because they are in space? Well, when Europeans sought to colonize the New World, they did so with the blessing of the Catholic Church, then the most powerful institution in the world. The Church promulgated the doctrine of discovery, which provided that European monarchs that colonized quote-unquote pagan lands had the right to claim title to those lands in the name of the Christian God. In short, the doctrine of discovery laid the groundwork for the legalized conquest of lands that were previously inhabited, and it disregarded the rights of those inhabitants to maintain their own sovereignty. It wasn't great, to say the least, and the results are still felt today. The brutal wars that resulted in the drawing of artificial boundaries on maps to divide land between conquering nations still reverberate throughout our society, in terms of economic development and cultural strife and military conflict, among other things. We don't want to go down the same path with respect to space development. So what does space law say about the potential for colonization? Let's begin our analysis by looking back at first principles. The key legal prescription from the Outer Space Treaty actually runs contrary to the concepts of the doctrine of discovery. Whereas the doctrine of discovery sought to grant sovereignty to nations that conquered pagan territories, the Outer Space Treaty begins from the exact opposite position. It specifically bans the appropriation of celestial bodies by the signatories. That means that no country may claim sovereignty over any celestial body. The Moon will not be American, Chinese, nor Russian. Neither will Titan nor Mars. Further, it provides that all exploration has to be done for peaceful purposes. Some might suggest that this forecloses the possibility of colonization at all. For example, attorney Michael Listner claims that this provision serves as a bar to colonization for both public and private actors. Why does it apply to private actors? Well, Listner, among others who adopt a similar viewpoint, argue that private colonization, in addition to appropriation by states, is barred by the simple fact that under existing space law, private activities must be regulated by the launching state. That means that such launching states, as discussed, maintain jurisdiction or control over those entities, and have the authority and duty to regulate their activities. That includes, in this view, the private act of colonization. Now, because those private colonies would be subject to the jurisdiction and regulatory authority of the launching state, they, listener suggests, would act like the sovereign-ish territory of that launching state. After all, to have jurisdiction and regulatory authority implies some type of sovereign power over those being regulated. Now, an opposing view offered by some of the authors in your readings this week suggests that Article 2's prohibition isn't so clear. Gessel, for example, suggests that the, quote, Article 2 of the OST was not written to ban establishing a colony on a celestial body. Instead, it was written to prevent a country from claiming a celestial body, such as the moon, as their own sovereign territory, close quote. Proponents of this vision suggest that the OST actually contains language that would support the colonization efforts of not just private companies, but also governments, provided that they did not try to appropriate the entire celestial body. They point to Article 4 of the OST, which specifically provides that the use of any equipment or facility necessary for peaceful exploration of the moon and celestial bodies shall not be prohibited. Are colonies necessary facilities for the peaceful exploration of celestial bodies? The language is admittedly vague, but Gessel also looks towards Article 12 to support his argument. Article 12 provides that if representatives of another nation want to visit the facilities of a state party, it should be permitted, provided that there is reasonable notice given. Now, why is this critical to his argument? Because the requirement that reasonable notice be given implies that access can be denied in its absence, and one of the hallmarks of private property rights is the right to exclude. The article itself refers to stations, installations, equipment, and space vehicles of state parties. Would colonial settlements fit under that definition, thus offering the right to exclude certain individuals? Does that mean that space law contemplates and permits the establishment of private property? Well, these scholars argue that if the Outer Space Treaty had intended to bar colonization outright, it could have explicitly done so, but it didn't, and that's meaningful. In the end, there is no clear treaty answer to the question of whether colonization is legally permissible. Space law does seem to bar assertions of sovereignty, at least over entire celestial bodies, and possibly over parts of them as well, while at the same time arguing and arguably recognizing the importance of certain private property rights, including the right to exclude or restrict access. Could that recognition of private property rights apply to an area on a planet or moon, rather than just a facility? After all, if I build a facility on the moon, it could be argued that to ensure the safety and utility of that facility, I should also control some of the surrounding land. So does the facility include such surrounding land, and if so, how much? And the utility, after all, of the facility could be drastically reduced by other nations' activities in its immediate vicinity. I wouldn't want some other nation to build a mine directly in front of my water treatment facility, after all. What about if I have two facilities that operate in tandem? Do I get to claim property rights over the land between the two facilities? When I build multiple facilities, do I get to cordon off a larger area, perhaps the size of a town, or city, or even a country? And these are not novel problems. Indeed, there are areas of the Earth where no claims of sovereignty are permitted as well, and yet nations work cooperatively in their management of these areas. Antarctica and the high seas are examples, and we've also successfully established sovereignty-sharing regimes with respect to the International Space Station. Perhaps similar regimes could be applied to celestial settlements. Now, for example, if we look towards Antarctica as an example of a shared sovereignty regime, we can begin to see the outlines of an international treaty governing the operation of scientific and commercial facilities on other celestial bodies. From a jurisdiction perspective, it is the individual's home country that continues to hold jurisdiction over the individuals while they are at the scientific station. Governance decisions, however, which affect large areas, are made at an annual Antarctic Treaty consultative meeting, where countries that carry out scientific missions in Antarctica are given the right to vote on governance issues. Decisions are legally binding once all consultative members have reached consensus. Could we establish something similar by treaty with respect to space settlements? Now, it's possible that at early stages, such a consultative process could be established to assist in governance issues between scientific stations on distant celestial bodies. Something similar already happens with respect to the governance of the International Space Station, arguably humanity's first off-world colony. The International Space Station is a cooperative program involving Europe, the US, Russia, Canada, and Japan, although Russia recently announced it was leaving the agreement. Each state has jurisdiction over elements that it provides to the station, and each state maintains jurisdiction over their astronauts while at the station. Could such a joint operation sovereignty sharing arrangement be applied in settlements on other planets and moons? It's possible. Now, if colonies are established, the next question will be one of governance. In the early years of any settlement's existence, there is likely to be a significant dependence on Earth to provide necessary supplies and materials. With a small population, the primary task of the inhabitants will be survival. It's possible that for some matters, direct democracy, i.e. everyone voting on a particular issue, might be possible. But as matters of governance become more and more complicated, direct democracy tends to struggle. You see, direct democracy requires a radically informed populace. And as tasks become more complicated, having a population remain that informed about political issues, while also running the day-to-day operations of the facility, well, it proves challenging. As a result, in the early years, there is potential argument for an increased oversight by earthbound bodies. But there will come a point in time when the settlement has reached sufficient size that it might seek to assert more independence in its governance, where it might seek to establish itself as a separate, free state. How would international law deal with such an action? Well, this is a very novel question. As a result, there are not a lot of clear answers. One of the defining principles of international law is the principle of self-determination. This principle represents one of the major shifts to the recognition of individual rights vis-à-vis state rights. You see, throughout most of history, any self-determinative right of the population was largely deemed irrelevant, particularly if the people's will was counter to the geopolitical, economic, and strategic interests of the major political powers in the region. This changed with the enshrinement of the right to self-determination in both the UN Charter and now as a principle of customary international law. See, the Charter that provides that one of its primary purposes is to, quote, develop friendly relations among nations based on the respect for the principle of equal rights and self-determination of peoples, and to take other appropriate measures to strengthen universal peace. The concept of self-determination was then codified in the UN General Assembly's Friendly Relations Declaration, which provides that, quote, all people have the right to freely determine without external interference their political status, and to pursue their economic, social, and cultural development, and every state has the duty to respect this right. So if the right to self-determination attaches to people on Earth, why would not a similar rationale attach to peoples who are no longer on Earth, but are living in settlements on other celestial bodies? Are colonists not a people under this definition? Now, a concern that many have is that if a celestial settlement asserts its rights to self-determination, the reaction of the home country may not be accepting. China in particular, with its authoritarian style of government, has already arguably refused to recognize the right to self-determination for people living in Tibet, Taiwan, and Hong Kong. Would it be willing to accept independence of a space colony? Or would conflict be the more likely result? There are no easy answers to these questions. So as an international community, we have to devote time and resources to planning on how to confront them. International treaties, declarations, and agreements are necessary to establish not just how colonies would be governed in the short term, but how they would be controlled, if at all, over the long term. Well, that does it for this week's short introductory podcast. I will see you next week for another edition of the Space Law and Policy podcast series.